Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Yes. Perfect. All right. Welcome to this presentation titled A Dynamic Dog Walk. My name is Max. I'm a composer, sound designer, audio system guy for games. And in this talk, I want to quickly run you through the strategies I employed and the lessons I learned while working on a little game called Dogwalk. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dogwalk is a little wholesome exploration game where you play as a big, fluffy dog wandering around a winter woodland as you drag around this kid on a leash and you try not to bump into too much stuff. It was developed by the Blender studio in Amsterdam as an open source project to improve the pipeline between Blender and Godot. Before the project officially went into production, I had already heard about it. I happened to know the game director, Julian, from some meetups, and I had already seen some beautiful concept art by Vivian. So when the time came for production and I was offered to work on it, I said, yes, of course, I'll make everything. This sounded so fun. For me, it was a first big project. So we set up a meeting and started speaking about the specs of the project. There were a couple of requirements. Firstly, it had to have an adaptive soundtrack. Of course, naturally, yeah. It had to have some Foley, some voice acting, some field recordings for the ambience and the environment. Sure, yeah, we can do that. Oh yeah, also some additional music for the trailer, the main menu, some cinematics in the game. Yeah, okay, I can do that, I think. Oh yeah, could you also implement everything? Sure, I have some Godot experience. Yeah, I'd like to believe so. And of course, it needed to sound cohesive. Now this, I hope I was pretty convinced of I could do. My heart dropped a little bit, though, when I found out that I had 2 months for this. I had also planned a holiday at the start of these 2 months for a week, so it was actually 7 weeks. So I knew I had to hit the ground running, so let's go. Lucky for me, I had secretly already started. Before being properly onboarded, I did the obvious thing where I gathered some inspirations. A little playlist of songs and soundtracks that I think would be a good fit for the game. When I got a little more onboarded, made this playlist collaborative, talked to Julian, we did a lot of back and forth between songs to get an idea of what instrumentation should be, the overall mood, the tempo, the vibe, yada yada, all these things. And because I really wanted to do this project, I also already started sketching before I was asked to do it officially. A little bit of a cheat there. And all of these sketches, they were about a minute in length. They were very low production quality, but it allowed me to iterate very fast on all the feedback that I got through our little Discord chat. Having a better sense of what I wanted it to sound like, and being properly onboarded, there was one thing I really wanted to address. Being an animation studio, the most unique feature, I would say, for the game is, of course, the beautiful handcrafted paper-like art style. Vivian, the art director on the project, she is in this room. I will not point her out, that would be a little harsh. Paper prototype everything, from the player characters like the dog, to the trees, the bushes, even the textures for the ground. And I really wanted to capture this feeling and support it through sound. So, on my first day, I made a little bit of a bold move to go to the office of Blender, walk around, grab all the paper and art and craft supplies that I could find a nice quiet room where I could sit, and I recorded every possible sound that came to mind that I could make using all these various instruments. Now, this left me with quite a large library of sounds. It took me another weekend to slice all the sounds into usable samples, to apply some light processing to make them sound more cohesive, and of course name all of these files accordingly so I had an overview of what I was doing. All in all, this left me with about 1,000 different samples that I could use, both for music and for sound effects, and I decided to try and stick to this, so I wouldn't have to go back and forth between recording and processing and all these things. Yeah, I was happy with that. I thought, I got assets. Nice. Now, of course, these weren't always perfect, so during the development process, I would try to stay lightweight when editing these sounds. A lot of it could be done directly in the Godot animator. When it came to timing, I could slice up a sample into 2 duplicates and just adjust the timing. However, sometimes I would have to do a little more processing, so I had a little program open that I could just open from Godot with a hotkey to edit a single sound, doing fades, doing pitch, doing a little bit of denoising. And sometimes I needed to work on multiple sounds, so I had a couple of lightweight batch processing programs that I could use, but I tried not leaving Godot. Having my assets and all my tools in place, it was ready to define what the soundtrack should work like. There were 2 main goals for this soundtrack in the game. The first being the soundtrack should drive and adapt to player movement. This being an exploration game, we wanted players to feel a sense of speed as they were moving faster across the map. And if they were standing still, we wanted to have more calm music. There was also a second goal. Again, being an exploration game, we wanted to help players navigate the environment. There were some visuals, like these little maps and some signs in the game, because during playtesting we found out a lot of people were running in circles, and the map wasn't huge, so that was something that we wanted to address. But there was also a possibility to help navigation with the use of music. So, knowing what the goals were, I went to concept a master plan. I hope this doesn't hurt too much. I think it works for me, so if my brain can handle it, you can probably do it. But basically, I decided to make one big composition that would transition and layer into each other, out of each other, at the moments needed. At the top part of this little diagram, you can see most of the linear music. The main menu had a simple track, about 30, 40 seconds, that would loop. For the cinematics, the intro and the outro scene, and the credits, there were also linear tracks that could transition into and out of each other. This was pretty simple. It wasn't just a crossfade, although it came pretty close. But, of course, the meat of the game, okay, so that was that part. The meat of the game is the movement. For the movement, I decided I wanted to have layers of music for each style of movement. I looked at some graphs or some diagrams of horse racing and found the right terms for the horse being idle, walking, trotting, and galloping. And I figured, okay, 4 states sounds about right. I can make 4 different states of movement music. Secondly, I also needed to have a couple of layers for different areas in the game. We refer to these as the forest, the pond, and the fence areas. These little extra layers of music would help players subconsciously remember where they are on the map and hopefully hint them in the right direction when they were lost. Finally, we had an idea for having some music for the kid whenever the mood of the kid changes. Say they bump into a bunch of stuff, they hit their head, they fall, they cry. But I ended up not making music for this, but rather implementing this with some recorded voice acting from one of the colleagues' kids, and further sound effects. Most importantly, it of course all needed to be one big composition and sound cohesive, a big monolith. So, I thought I was going to say I was getting to work. There was one problem with the movement speed. Initially, Julian and I talked a lot about how it should work, how should the music feel faster, and the first natural response was, well, why don't we just increase the tempo, make something go faster? And although that seemed like a reasonable approach, this wasn't very easy to do within Godot. As this was an open source project, we didn't want to use other licenses or middleware, so we had to do it all in Godot. So instead of stretching and producing artifacts in the sound, I wanted to have a little smarter approach and fake the tempo increase. Basically, let's say you start with the bar music. Don't worry, there's probably people here who know music, but this is absolutely not cheap music. I do not write that stuff, so don't worry about it. You can understand this. Firstly, I start with a little melody that I want to represent the movement of the dog. This you could interpret as little bum, 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 up and down. To make it faster, there's a very small trick you can do. Measure the time between the notes, create incisions, and for the next layer, we just put notes in between the notes. So instead of boom, boom, you have boom, bum, boom, bum, boom, bum, boom, without actually changing the tempo. Now, repeating this process, I could add as many layers as I wanted to, as long as it sounded reasonable and not overwhelming. So we ended up with 4, and that worked. Not only was this a nice way to increase the feel and the tempo, although it didn't change, it was also very nice for me to work with layers, because now I just had 3 or more separate layers that I could insert into each other without any notes overlapping and affecting each other. This meant there was way less time spent on dynamic mixing in the game, and it was easy to implement. I want to make a stupid little joke here. So the blue notes here represent the idle state. The red ones, the orange ones, the walk state. And then I have the red notes for the running, or as I would like to call this, the Irut-nan-lilnek system. Patent pending. Okay, so I knew my system, I knew my approach. I'd done all the thinky parts before I got to actually make music. And I opened my music software. I write a bunch of different versions that I like, a bunch of different sections, incorporating these layers that we just talked about with the notes. And I want to see if it works. Obviously, you have an idea, you want to test it, right? I didn't have a system yet in code. I wanted to prototype what it would sound like. So, using a little MIDI controller that some of you know, I basically hooked up each of the separate layers or tracks that I wanted to test to this device. And there's little sliders on there that you can use to increase or decrease volume. There's other buttons too if you want to do more. But using this device, I could quickly feel what the transitions between the layers would sound like while just looking at somebody play the game, or if I was really able to play the game with one hand and maybe do the sliders with the other, having the song on loop. It seemed to work pretty fine. I thought it was good enough, so I was ready to go to implement it. Next, aside from the movement, I also talked about the game needing music for navigation, little area layers. So I made a very, very simple data structure, a resource in Godot with all of the layers that I had made in my music software, and hooked them up to triggers. These triggers, what did I call them? Music zone triggers, are basically just little areas that if the player passes through, I can define a behavior of what layers should, activate or deactivate, and how fast they should deactivate and activate. So much like the controller, these little checkboxes acted as faders going on and faders going off. Oh, I have to tap through that again. Having this system in place, I could get to work on making the little map zoning. This area in the game, we called it the fence area, needed to have a specific layer. So I make one big zone. There you go. This sounds like the fence music right now. Is that my time? Oh. But because I had a system in place and I was playtesting the game a lot, I could go into a couple more levels of detail. I was playing around with fading in and out layers, and I found that there were nice combinations that I hadn't thought of before. So the next thing I did was kind of leading the player. Rather than telling them, you are in this area, I wanted to know where they should go. So I placed smaller trigger zones to change smaller tweaks in the music. In the red little circle up there is an object that the player in the game should achieve in order to finish it. And placed a small trigger zone there for them to remind them, this is where you need to be. Now, leading up to this area, I placed a couple more zones that were less intense, but had a little bit more of the vibe of that ultimate goal they needed to reach. There's also a little zone there where the player can see the object they're supposed to get, but they can't reach it, so this is a little bit of a red herring, this yellow area. And then finally, when the player decides to leave the area altogether, I had some extra zones to fade away this music that was supposed to draw them in. And you can kind of see this as a heat map or a way to play hotter, colder, but with music. Now, at this point, I was practically done with the music for the areas and for the movement speed. So there was a lot of time left to place other ambient sounds and polish sound effects, and playtest the game. At this stage in the production, most people were finishing up their work, and we were constantly playtesting the game. And I stumbled across an interesting problem. As the game was designed to be a relatively short experience, so was my accompanying soundtrack. This meant that playtesting a game for hours and hours on end while listening to the same little tune was not a very pleasant experience. The game director honestly told me that in the last weeks of the project, whenever they went to playtest, one of the first things they did was go to the menu and put the music off. And I thought, that is terrible. Of course, that was not what we thought the real user experience was going to be, because it was designed to be a 20-minute experience, 30-minute experience. But it led me to one little extra thing I wanted to add to the game. When the player idles for a very long time, it was decided that there should be a separate animation where the kid goes up to the dog and they start hugging each other and petting. And I wanted to accompany this by removing most of the music. So I made an extra layer. It was very easy to do. I implemented it. Was also very easy to do because I had the systems in place. And I decided that whenever you sit and idle for a long time, whether you're going to the bathroom, picking up the phone, or whatever happens, the music would slowly fade away. The ambience increases. You hear the birds and the bees and the wind and the water a little bit more. And if you wait long enough, you get a nice, soft, gentle version of the music as a reward. And as you wait longer and longer, more of this music is added until it's quite rich. And then when you're in this dreamy landscape, you're like, what the hell is happening? Start playing again, it fades away. So with that being said, the project was pretty much done on my end. Now, I'm not really timing this, but I want to give a little bit of the advice and the lessons I learned. Firstly, restrict and commit. Limit the scope of your assets and the systems you're going to be using before you're going into implementation when you're prototyping sound or anything, really. It saves a tremendous amount of time going back and forth between different processes like recording, processing, all that stuff. And it also speeds up implementation because you design the scope first before getting to work. As you might be able to tell, I have massive ADHD, so this tip is mostly for me. The second, a very obvious one, when you're prototyping, communication is key. Talk about what you're working on so people can provide input before you start making something or implementing it, and not after. That saves you an extra revision. Also ask about the priorities of the project constantly. If you are able to, be physically present with your team as much as possible. I know for us audio folks, this is a big ask. We're often freelancers or contract workers or maybe even completely remote, but it really, really helps. Being in the same room as the people who are making the game and playtesting it constantly allows you to save valuable time, walk around when you need help, advice, ask for priorities, or even see what people are working on and get motivated yourself. It happened a bunch of times where people were just adding things that weren't really within the scope, and I thought, hey, that needs sound too. Let me put it on my list. Of course, being in a very, very short, tight deadline with the team also means that people can't always communicate with you. I don't know how many times I sent messages back and forth saying, okay, I did this, what should I work on? I'm going to do this, maybe. And of course, everybody's working their ass off, so nobody has time to really review what you're saying. This meant I had to play test the game myself a lot. Sometimes also people don't really know how to direct you. After all, I was the designated audio person. Some people didn't know how to tell me what to do. So playtesting it yourself is a great way to find out if assets are missing, if things need polish, or maybe discover opportunities for new sounds or new systems, if you have the time, obviously, if you have the time. Lastly, I want to say, I'm going to scroll for this a little bit, shoot first and ask questions later. The most fun moments in the process of prototyping for me were the times where I could explore ideas when they were unasked. Extra music layers, sound effects, or mechanics that evolved out of interest and fun. There is a caveat: as long as it does not take away from the actual priorities. For freelancers, if you are worried about spending too much extra time on things that were not asked, because you ultimately have to get paid for this stuff, and we don't always get paid that much, you can always create a proposal and say, hey, I noticed these things, I think it would be really valuable for these, and these reasons. Can I send an extra invoice? And most of the times people are like, sure, great, you're thinking with us. And even if that doesn't happen, we're still in it to create something together, and ultimately, your opinion is valid, and this is also a bit your baby. It's a collaborative baby. It's going to have your name on it. Finally, very obvious, little cheesy here, follow the fun. It speaks for itself. Overall, it can be a very chaotic process to prototype, so focus on the things that motivate you to create. This was very important to me. Finally, I want to say, if you haven't played the game yet, it's available on Steam. It's free. It's made by some lovely people. Go play it. It takes you about the same time as this talk. Thanks for listening.
Great, thank you.
I don't need that mic, yeah.
Any questions from the audience over there?
I can see them, yeah.
Thank you so much for presentation, incredibly inspiring.
Thank you.
How did you manage mixing and arranging? What was done in DAW and what was done in Engine?
Okay, this is a terrible hot take, and I wish nobody asked me this question. I tried doing almost everything in the DAW up front. As I mentioned before, the movement layers of the music were the ones that were most changing all the time. So having the space between these notes and making sure they didn't overlap, there wasn't much issue when I initially implemented it. I did have to go back, of course, a couple of times. I didn't do everything in one go perfectly. Nobody does. But there were some things that you could do in Godot. There you can put EQs, you can make different buses. I kept it very minimal. There was a lot of pressure. I myself would say I could, of course, do a better job at that. But I didn't use Godot for much of it, no.
And did you kind of pre-baked your reverberation in DAW?
Yes.
Yes, there is no possibilities in Godot to make kind of procedural reverberation stuff.
Everything is pre-baked. Yeah, they're all pre-rendered layers, and they just kind of fit like that. With the area layers and some of the other layers that were not related to movement, they were very subtle and could be added. I made sure that they were in different registers. So, for example, the dog walking is a very low bassy sound. The kid is represented by a high plugged violin. And much of the other layers that corresponded to areas where other instruments in other registered, they were also generally a lot softer. So they would just add a little bit to the mix. I think the only thing that really worked for me was putting a limiter on the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
There was a question over here as well.
I'm curious about this question.
Thank you. You just mentioned as well about the movement layers that are changing quite quickly all the time.
Yes.
I was just wondering how you managed the speed of those, because I can imagine they are constantly changing. Did you use certain times it had to last for 3 seconds at least, or did you just leave them up to just change whenever?
I'm not going to try finding this in my slides. I originally had 60 slides or something before I decided I needed to cut this down. But basically, that's a very common problem. How should they change? When should they change? Should there be are there edge case conditions? You don't want the music to immediately start increasing. So most of the states had little, waiting times or cool down times when they were entered or exited. And there were other edge case scenarios whenever the kid was in a certain state, they couldn't trigger a certain movement state. I also made it so that certain areas in the music would override the movement. There's a little part in the game where you're just supposed to kind of walk around and find your way through a very dense area, and I wanted players to notice that they're going in the right direction. And rather than increasing, I took away movement layers. So I made it quieter and quieter. Because sometimes when all the sounds around you disappear and it's silent, suddenly you're like, oh, what just happened? So kind of making people aware. Other than that, it was just a matter of trying to make these movement layers really work well together. There were ultimately only 4 movement layers, which was doable. I'm happy to talk more about it and happy to get some advice on that. Yeah.
Great. Another question over here.
how many of the, I think it was 1,000 sounds with paper,
Yeah.
how many of those were actually used in the final product?
I do not exactly know. I did go over how many like final delivered assets there were in terms of sound effects, which I think was 321 or something, 322. But this included also voices by a kid and some UI elements. But the UI elements, for example, are made using little like snippy paper sounds. Of course, it looked as if I had perfectly made these assets and then implemented them, but I did go back and forth, layering, doing actual sound design, combining assets. I'd like to say I used half of them, but I really don't know at this point, no.
Did you manage to make anything in terms of the music, not the sound effects, anything that wasn't percussive sounds with paper? Because I'm having a difficult time imagining.
I really wanted to, I was wondering all this time, like, oh, what does paper sound like? As in, like, not, of course, what does paper sound like? But how can you make paper an instrument that isn't just like a transient?
Yeah.
I tried doing little samplers and sampled instruments, dragging in different assets. It didn't really work for me. Also, if you remember, right at the beginning, there was a lot of referencing and some sketches I did in combination with the game director, and I found that there were very specific instruments that they really liked, so I tried using those instead. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question from over here. I think there was a hand. No? Okay, last question.
Hi. So I played the game yesterday in my hotel room late at night.
Nice.
If I can give you a compliment, I turned up the volume because it's really quite the dynamic.
I hope it didn't clip.
No, it didn't. It didn't.
Oh, there should be a little bit.
It's a dynamic, good-sounding game. So really nice job. In the beginning of the talk, you mentioned cohesive. I was wondering, do you have a process to determine which sounds fit together? How do you make it sound cohesive? What works together? Do you just listen to it all at a point, or like how?
Yeah, I have no background in music, as in I wasn't schooled. I didn't go to conservatory. I had like, guitar lessons when I was 12 and I hated them. But yeah, I like to go by feel and intuition a lot. I watched some of Tom's videos online to learn how to do orchestration. But yeah, just go and feel, which means that it can waste some time because you don't really have a nice strategic approach. But ultimately, if it sounds good, it sounds good. Yeah, I usually start by making the track like as full as I can imagine it and just taking out as much as I can until it still sounds good, because then you can get better production on it and there's more room for everything. Yeah, I don't think I should be the one giving advice on that. But in this case, the cohesiveness came from having one big asset bank of sounds that were all recorded by the same microphone in the same room on the same day, but by the same hands or whatever. So that really helped. Like, I wouldn't say they're the highest quality assets, but they all had a very similar sound. So that really helped.